I wanted to comment on the situation of what we have right now going on with the church, especially with the church in light of the coronavirus and what I think we can learn from the New Testament in response to this. I think we are at a pivotal place. I think that this is a moment in time when things are going to drastically shift, and this is why. In the early church, this is in the beginning of the book of Acts, basically what happens is that the apostles are waiting in the upper room for 10 days, praying that the Spirit of God would come, as Jesus promised that it would. And then in Acts chapter 2, we see that the Spirit of God falls on people, and they begin preaching the gospel boldly. People hear it, people come to faith, they follow Jesus. And in this time period, what happens is that people are still meeting in the temple. They're also meeting outside the temple in what's called Solomon's porch or Solomon's colonnade. And then they're gathering in house to house as well. But what we see happening during this time is that people are coming to faith, and they're becoming part, especially in Jerusalem, of this body that is in the capital, so to say. Now, of course, there are people who came to faith at Pentecost. They returned to their hometown, wherever that hometown may have been. But this is what we see, this gathering. And as this happens, we see that people are coming to faith, so there are new followers. And we also see that people are being equipped to follow Jesus. And what I mean by that is that people aren't just believing in Jesus. It's not just converts, but there's actually people who are becoming equipped followers of Jesus. We know this is true because people are coming to faith daily. We know this is true because in Acts chapter 5, it says that all of the city is filled with the teaching, and this isn't just from Peter preaching. We also see it in Acts chapter 6 when they have people from within the church family, the big church family that is, who are distributed needs, responsibilities to take care of the widow and the orphan so that the apostles can continue focusing on teaching and prayer. And so what that tells us, and the people they pick, they're not chumps, right? These are filled with the Holy Spirit. These are people who are capable to teach. I mean, you look at Stephen's sermon that he preaches. And so basically we see that people are coming to follow Jesus, and then they're being equipped. Now in Acts chapter 8, that's in the first, from Acts 2 to 7. And then what happens in Acts chapter 8 is there's persecution. Stephen gets stoned, and from that point of persecution, it says that the church scattered everywhere except for the leaders. The leaders were still in this place of Jerusalem, and then everybody else, all of a sudden, they had to go and they scattered. But it says that not only did they scatter, it says that they preached the gospel everywhere they went. Specifically, it says they evangelized the word everywhere that they went. And so since they evangelized the word everywhere they went, and the apostles are still in the home base, we realize that these were people who weren't just converts, but they were equipped followers. And God uses this to expand the church across the ancient Near East, and it continues to grow and grow and grow. After all, Jesus said, "I will build my church." Not Peter will build his church. He says, "I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." So the question that I want to ask is, what do we learn from this for our unique situation right now? And so this is what I see has happened over the years. Over the years, in America I'm speaking of, I'm not making these general statements about the whole world, but we had the development of larger churches. And of course, some people came to faith through these churches. I'm not saying that people have not come to faith through these churches, but what's happened in large numbers is that smaller churches have kind of been vacuumed up into these larger churches. Now, this, for some reason, we can understand this because often the larger churches with more resources, they have maybe some higher capacity people, maybe they have better teaching, better musicians, people who they do a stronger job. And so some of these smaller jobs that have been kind of more mom and pop, they get gobbled up by the big box church, so to say. Now, I'm not trying to be critical of these churches. I'm not saying that they aren't honoring to Jesus. I'm not saying that they don't want to worship Jesus. I'm just stating something that is pretty much a reality. And now, over the course of this time, people have chosen to follow Jesus. People have followed him. The question in my mind right now is, have they been equipped? Have they been equipped? You see, because right now, because of the coronavirus, what's happening is that the people who make up the people who came out of these groups now cannot go to those big buildings. And so we have a very similar scattering to what happened in Acts chapter 8, except instead of persecution, it's happening because of the virus. And so now people can no longer go to this one central gathering. And so what we have happening is that people have to scatter into their homes, right? They have to scatter into their homes. The question then, in my mind, is, are they preaching the gospel as they go? Do they even know how? And you see the tension happening here because in the early church, what happened is everybody scattered and basically it kept functioning. But you see what happening here is that there's still this giant tractor beam because of the internet. And yes, I understand the irony of the fact that I'm making a video right now. This giant tractor beam because of the internet, where this entity, this kind of large gathering, is still trying to keep everybody somehow a part of it, even though they cannot physically go. And so that's why everybody's talking about how do we continue to preach the gospel over the internet, over the television, over websites, live streaming, these sorts of things. I think that's the wrong question to ask. I think the question we should be asking is, how do we equip our people right now to thrive at home? You see, because the reality is that this is our window of opportunity. You see, if our whole goal right now is how do we make sure that everybody can stay connected to my church so that we last this 12 weeks, I think that's the wrong question. You see, because what happens, heaven forbid, if all of a sudden we have an internet outage or we have a power failure or any of those kinds of things, all of a sudden our people are destined for health, or are they destined to basically be spiritually unwell? And so I think the energy that we need to be putting out right now in this very short window of time before this whole thing starts to crumble, and I believe that it will crumble, is how do we equip people to not just survive, but to spiritually thrive at home, the same way that the early church equipped people so that they were evangelizing the word, they were speaking the gospel, proclaiming the gospel everywhere they went as the church was scattered. And so I think that there's a couple key things that we need to be thinking about right now. The main one that I think we need to be thinking about is how to thrive spiritually at home. Churches, I implore you, if you want to do the best thing possible for your people right now, it's to equip them as quickly as you can, not to be overly reliant on streaming your service, but to thrive spiritually at home. I'm not saying that you shouldn't preach a sermon. That's not what I'm saying. But right now, what your people need more than anything is to teach them to thrive spiritually at home. Now, I'm going to link some tools in the comments section, in the information section rather, so that there's some things, some ideas that you can go to. But this is of the utmost important, so that your people know how to spiritually thrive at home, so that your people know how to be missional. In other words, they know how to evangelize the word, how to speak the gospel at home, and so your people know how to be faithful at home. You see, the problem that we are seeing is that all of our previous church culture, what I like to call churchianity, over the last however many really decades, has been equipped to have people be overly reliant on someone feeding them instead of self-feeding. It's been overly reliant on inviting someone to experience the gospel from a professional instead of equipping people to be the gospel and to speak the gospel everywhere they went. And we have basically told our people for generations that you bring your kids to church, we will be faithful with them. This is above you. And whether it's Sunday school or whether it's CCD, whatever your framework is, realize now is the time to be faithful at home, to be missional where you live, work, learn, and play. Yes, you can do this over text and over FaceTime and over phone calls, and to spiritually self-feed so that if things fall apart, you know that you have the Word, you have the Spirit, you have prayer, you have the spiritual disciplines. You know how to hear Jesus. Jesus says, "My sheep hear my voice." Do you know how to hear his voice? Do you know how to hear his voice, or have you become overly reliant on someone, a pastor or a teacher, a professor, someone else basically telling you what you need to hear from Jesus? I'm not saying that there's not a place for that. The gift of teaching exists because God wants teachers, but realize that you need to know how to spiritually feed your family and be spiritually fed in the small microcosm, which is your home. You need to learn how to be missional without just inviting someone to listen to what someone else has to say, inviting someone to hear from the Bible, inviting someone to hear God's story, to hear your story, and you need to know how to be faithful with your spouse, faithful with your kids, faithful with your extended family, faithful with your block, all of these sorts of things. And so what I'm going to be doing over the next batch of days is I'm going to be making short videos that are focused on these core things, because right now we are in a place where the church went from being gathered to scattered, and the problem is we don't know if it's going to survive. Now, will the church, the big C church, survive? Absolutely. Jesus says, "I am building my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." And so the battering ram of the church is always going to go forward because Jesus is faithful. But guess what? It doesn't mean your organization is going to go forward. It doesn't mean my organization is going to go forward. The church, the called out ones, the people of God will continue to go forward. But what we're going to see right now is a massive filtration of those who have been equipped to be disciples and those who have just been told it's okay to be a convert. And so I would encourage you to begin thinking through these concepts now.